A black woman walks into the police station without anyone knowing she is the new police chief. Insults, contempt, and then a hateful punch from an arrogant officer. But he didn't know. He just punched his own career. When the true identity is revealed, everyone is stunned. And what is the price to pay for this arrogance? Please continue to follow this story and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next meaningful stories. Arlington is a mid-sized city in the American South where racial discrimination in policing remains a hidden problem despite decades of fighting for equality. The police force is still influenced by old ideas with implicit racial discrimination. White officers tend to be promoted faster, while officers of color, no matter how capable, are undervalued and have difficulty climbing the ranks. Before Vanessa Thompson was appointed, the Arlington Police Department was a conservative operation, where veteran officers maintained their own system. Bias in law enforcement, derogatory remarks about people of color, and even incidents of police brutality against black citizens were covered up in elaborate ways. Despite complaints from the community, change was slow, because those with power within the system did not want to lose their privileges. The appointment of the city's first black police chief was a shock to conservatives within the force. Although the decision was strongly supported by the mayor and city council, there was some murmuring and quiet opposition within the department. Vanessa Thompson, 45, has 20 years of experience in the police force, having worked in many areas with complex crime situations. She is known for her sharp thinking, iron discipline, and steadfast commitment to justice. From a patrol officer, she gradually climbed to higher positions thanks to her real ability, despite facing many obstacles due to her gender and skin color. Vanessa is of average height, with a strong build, short, neat, curly hair, sharp eyes, and a confident demeanor. She is not easily intimidated by anyone. Her years in the industry have shaped her into someone who is not afraid of conflict, but also understands that changing a system requires the right strategy. As a black woman in the police force, she has seen injustices not only against citizens, but also against her own colleagues. She knows that to truly change the system from within, she must be tough, smart, and not let her emotions get the best of her. Lieutenant Richard Miller is the archetypal old Arlington police officer. White, conservative, misogynistic, and especially contemptuous of his black superiors. With more than 15 years in the force, Miller is not only known for his toughness at work, but also for his extensive relationships with other senior officers in the police department. He was tall, muscular, and always exerted authority over his subordinates and those he deemed unworthy of respect. Miller believed that a strong police department had to be run by people with real authority, which, he said, were white men. That morning, Vanessa walked into the Arlington Police Department, where she would now be the top officer. But instead of making an official appearance, she wore casual clothes, dark jeans, a simple shirt, and a smart blazer. No name tag, no badge, no indication that she was the new police chief. The reason ? She wanted to observe how the officers in this department treated an ordinary black woman without knowing who she was. As she walked through the glass doors of the police station, she could immediately sense the familiar atmosphere of an organization operating in the old way. Several officers stood huddled around the reception desk, chatting absent-mindedly with each other. In the corner of the room, a middle-aged black man sat in a waiting chair, looking worried. Vanessa did not rush to the reception desk. She stood still, observing silently. A middle-aged white officer was standing by the reception desk, drinking coffee and talking to a colleague. When he saw the black man sitting in the waiting chair, he pursed his lips and whispered to his colleague, "Another black guy with problems. Let's see what he comes complaining about today." The other colleague laughed, but did not reply. Vanessa frowned. This wasn't the first time she'd heard such words, but she still couldn't help but feel uncomfortable. As she approached the reception desk, she saw a young officer sitting behind it, engrossed in his phone, not paying any attention to the people waiting. The black man had been waiting for more than 15 minutes, but no one had asked him anything or offered any assistance. Vanessa cleared her throat slightly. The young officer looked her up and down, then gave a half-hearted smile. "What do you need?" he asked, his voice unfriendly. Vanessa studied his face closely, indifference, unprofessionalism, and a hint of disdain. "I'm here to see HR," she said, her voice calm. He glanced at her again, his eyes slightly judgmental. Then, without replying, he turned back to continue typing on his phone, leaving Vanessa standing there waiting. She silently memorized his face. Her first day here had started this way. Vanessa stood still, carefully observing the young officer's every move, who was indifferent to the citizens. The black man was still sitting and waiting, his face showing his impatience but not daring to say anything. She sighed. Just as she was about to find her own way inside, a deep voice rang out from behind her. "What is this?" Vanessa turned and saw a large man in his mid-40s, wearing a neat police uniform. He had short light brown hair, a square face, and piercing blue eyes. The badge on his chest read, Lieutenant Richard Miller. Miller looked her up and down, his eyes filled with judgment. He didn't greet her, just stood there with his arms crossed, looking annoyed. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice dry. Vanessa kept her composure. This was not the first time she had encountered this kind of attitude. She replied curtly, "I need to see HR to complete the paperwork." Miller raised his eyebrows, his eyes showing a hint of sarcasm. "Procedures? Are you sure you're in the right place?" Vanessa looked him straight in the eye. "This is the Arlington Police Department, right? I've come to the right place." Miller smirked. "I don't think HR has time to deal with cases like yours." Vanessa understood what he meant by that. Cases like yours. A subtle reference to her skin color or perhaps her gender. She didn't react immediately, but gently repeated the request. "I need to see HR." Instead of answering, Miller turned to the young officer sitting behind the reception desk. "Do you hear anything?" The young officer shrugged. "She wants to see HR." Miller chuckled. He looked at Vanessa with a mocking gaze, then shook his head. "Look, miss, I don't know if you're here to look for a job or file a complaint or something, but we don't have time to deal with such trivial matters." Vanessa began to feel her blood boil, but she kept it in check. "I have the right to serve like any other citizen," Miller sneered. "Rights? Let me guess. You just finished watching some movie on Netflix and thought you could come here and claim your rights?" A few officers nearby heard his words and burst out laughing. Others just glanced at him and continued their work. No one had any intention of intervening. Vanessa stood still, keeping her eyes on Miller. "I just want to get my paperwork done." Miller shook his head, sighing artificially. "Listen, lady, if you need help with welfare paperwork or anything, you'd better go to the Community Support Center. They don't handle that stuff here." Vanessa clenched her fists, but her voice remained calm. "I'm talking about police-related administrative procedures, not social welfare." Miller smirked. "Oh, I see. Let me guess. You're one of those people who came to monitor the police, right? Some new kind of human rights activist?" He nodded toward a group of officers standing nearby. "Guys, does anyone want to help this lady complete her monitoring procedures?" There was laughter, but no one really responded. Some of the younger officers looked embarrassed, but others just looked at Vanessa with curious eyes. Vanessa exhaled, slowly but surely. "I want to see the HR team leader." Miller paused for a second, then crossed his arms over his chest. "For what?" "Because I have the right to see them." Miller sneered. "Authority? You seem to like that word. But let me tell you one thing. Here, no one is obligated to do anything, especially not those who come here and give orders as if they have power." That statement made the surrounding officers laugh even louder. Some of them looked at Vanessa with disdain. Vanessa didn't laugh. She kept her cool, but the answer was clear. Miller was the problem. And not just him. It was the toxic environment he was helping to perpetuate. Vanessa no longer wanted to prolong this pointless conversation. She looked straight at Miller and repeated her request, this time with a sharper voice. "I want to see the HR captain. If you can't help me, then call someone who can." Miller paused. He didn't like the way Vanessa spoke, calm but authoritative. It made him feel out of control. "Are you ordering me around?" "Number, I am asking for a service that any citizen is entitled to receive." Miller narrowed his eyes. He didn't like this attitude. Didn't like that a black woman dared to stand before him without showing any fear. "I think you should get out of here before something happens." Vanessa crossed her arms and stood still. "Are you threatening me?" Miller took a step closer. "I'm warning you." The atmosphere in the room became heavy. The other officers began to fall silent, realizing that this situation was getting out of hand. Some of them began to feel that something was wrong. Vanessa still didn't move. "I won't leave until I meet the person I need to meet." Miller took a breath, his eyes flashing with anger. "Okay. You want to meet someone? I'll help you meet someone you won't like." He nodded to a nearby officer. "Take her out." The officer hesitated for a second. "But Lieutenant, I told you to get her out right now." The other officer bit his lip but stepped forward. Vanessa didn't move. Miller looked at her, his eyes full of challenge. All the officers who had been laughing earlier were now watching the confrontation between Richard Miller and the black woman standing in front of him. Vanessa kept her gaze steady. She was used to the contemptuous looks and the contemptuous words. But today, she was more than just a black woman standing in a police station. She was the new chief of police. Only no one recognized her. Miller was still standing in front of Vanessa, hands on hips, face full of defiance. He had not expected this woman to be so stubborn. "Are you going out, or should I take drastic measures?" Vanessa remained still, her voice calm but full of weight. "I told you, I won't leave until I meet the person I need to meet." Miller gritted his teeth, trying to stay patient. He didn't understand why she was standing there and confronting him like this. People like her, black women, wouldn't usually talk back to the police, let alone stand up to him like this. The surrounding officers began to feel the tension in the air. Some glanced at each other, wondering if Miller had gone too far. But no one said anything. Vanessa's silence provoked Richard Miller. For him, this was no longer a matter of kicking a stubborn woman out. It was a battle of dignity. He took a deep breath, then suddenly reached out and grabbed Vanessa's arm, squeezing it tightly. "I warned you, now get out!" He pulled her towards the door, using force to push her away. Vanessa felt his rough hands grip her. Anger rose in her, but she refused to let it get the better of her. She knew she couldn't let this guy control the situation. In a split second, Vanessa pushed Miller's hand away. He hadn't expected it. A woman, especially a black woman, daring to stand up to him. Miller took a step back, his eyes flashing with surprise, but then he quickly regained his ferocious expression. The surrounding officers remained silent, watching. Some chuckled, thinking that Vanessa was just struggling in vain. Vanessa held her position, her feet firmly on the floor, her gaze unwavering. "I advise you not to do this," she said, her voice calm but warning. But with someone like Richard Miller, that only made him want to dominate her more. Miller felt his pride challenged. A black woman had just slapped his hand away in front of all his co-workers. He clenched his fists, his teeth grinding together, and then, without thinking, he swung his fist. Pop! A punch straight to Vanessa's face. The force of the blow was so strong that she staggered back, her heel hitting the edge of the table, causing her to lose her balance and fall to the floor. A silence fell over the room for a few seconds. Then, there was a burst of laughter. "Well, that was a nice shot." Next time, she won't dare to be so stubborn. Some officers still laughed, treating this as normal. To them, the sight of a black woman being violently suppressed by a police lieutenant was nothing surprising. However, not everyone laughed. A few of the young officers began to feel uneasy. They might not be against Miller, but the scene before their eyes was something they could not completely ignore. In the corner, a female administrative assistant put her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. She had no idea that Miller would actually hit a woman in the middle of the police station. Another employee hurriedly stepped back, pulled out his phone, hesitating whether to call someone or not. No one spoke up to stop Miller, but they knew he had gone too far. Vanessa did not scream, did not moan. She felt a burning pain run from her cheek down her neck, but she refused to show weakness. Instead of lying still on the floor, she slowly pushed herself up with her hands. Miller looked at her, his eyes filled with surprise. He had hit her so hard, and yet she still hadn't fallen. Vanessa took a deep breath, adjusted her posture, and raised her head. She didn't seem scared. No crying, no uncontrollable anger. She just stood there, eerily calm. But just then, an office door opened. A middle-aged man with gray hair walked out of the HR department. He still had a stack of documents in his hand, his eyes scanning the crowd before stopping at Vanessa. It took him only a second to freeze, his face pale as he realized the horror that had just happened. "Oh my God!" He took a deep breath, then screamed almost immediately, "She's the new chief! What the hell did you guys do?" The sentence rang out like a thunderclap from a clear sky. Space seemed to freeze. The laughing officers fell silent. Richard blinked repeatedly, as if his brain couldn't process the information. No way. He turned back to look at Vanessa, his eyes filled with panic. All his arrogance and aggression suddenly disappeared. He looked at Vanessa, but this time it wasn't with contempt. It was with genuine fear. "No, it can't be," he stuttered, feeling his throat tighten. Cold sweat began to appear on his forehead. Vanessa stood still, not showing any anger nor raising her voice. She just silently observed his reaction, her eyes sharp as knives. Not only Miller, the officers who were laughing and joking earlier also started to get confused. They turned to look at each other, their eyes filled with anxiety. A few people took a step back, feeling their faces heat up as they recalled the sarcastic words they had just said. A young officer swallowed hard, then whispered, "Damn, did we just laugh at the sheriff?" No one answered, because everyone knows they just made a terrible mistake. At this moment, an administrative staff member ran over in panic. "That's Lisa Carter, the assistant in the Human Resources Department." She rushed to the manager, shouted Vanessa's identity, grabbed the file from his hand and flipped through it. Then she looked up, her voice panicked. "Oh my God, it's true. This is the new police chief, Vanessa Thompson, just appointed." The people around took a deep breath. No doubt about it. The woman they had just laughed at, despised, and even beaten, was the one with the highest authority here. An old officer standing in the corner of the room hurriedly took off his hat, not daring to look up. Lisa took a step back, her eyes still filled with horror. She glanced at Vanessa, then at Richard Miller, who was standing frozen. Vanessa took a deep breath, then slowly took a step forward. All eyes were on her, but she did not show any anger. She didn't scream, she didn't yell, she didn't curse, because she knew she didn't need to. She said only one sentence, in a low but authoritative voice. "Arrest Lieutenant Richard Miller immediately." The whole room exploded. Miller immediately recoiled. What? He looked around as if hoping someone would come to his aid, but no one dared to speak up. Miller opened his mouth, then shook his head quickly. "Wait, this is a misunderstanding." He raised his hands and tried to speak more calmly. "I don't know who you are. If I did, I wouldn't..." He was speechless, because he realized he had dug his own grave. Vanessa stood still, staring at him. "You're right. You don't know who I am." She paused for a moment, then continued coldly. "But that doesn't change the fact that you just attacked a civilian in the police station. And sadly, your superior officer." "Handcuff him!" Two officers stepped forward, grabbed Miller, twisted his arms behind his back, and handcuffed him in front of all his colleagues. Cold, metallic sound of locking up rang out, causing the people around to shiver. "Let go! What the hell are you doing?" Miller struggled violently, his voice turning into genuine panic. But no one answered him. The other officers remained still. No one dared to intervene or speak up to defend him. The people who had just laughed with Miller were now completely silent, their faces pale, no one daring to look at Vanessa. They knew the real nightmare was just beginning. Another step forward, standing opposite Miller, her eyes filled with authority. "Lieutenant Richard Miller," she said, her voice firm, "you are under arrest for assault upon a person in police custody. You have the right to remain silent." Miller gasped, almost unable to believe his ears. I'm a lieutenant. You can't do this to me." But no one cared about his words anymore. He hissed angrily, but also desperately. "This is a setup, a political conspiracy. I am not guilty. I am not guilty." Vanessa kept her face calm, not shaken by his screams. "You have the right to explain yourself in court," she replied coldly. "But now, you will have to face the consequences yourself." He stood still, his eyes full of panic, because he knew this time he could not escape. Two officers escorted him out of the office and straight downstairs. The door slammed behind them. The space in the police station fell into an eerie silence again. Vanessa's sharp gaze swept across the room. The officers who had once laughed and joined Miller now avoided her gaze. "I don't need to say it. You all know how serious this is." Vanessa's voice was cold, but there was no need to raise her voice, because every word she said was as heavy as a hammer. Some officers stood straight, their faces stiff, not daring to move. A young officer muttered, his voice hoarse, We're going to be suspended?" No one answered him, but everyone knows the answer is yes. Just an hour later, senior police officials held an emergency meeting. Miller's case report was placed in the middle of the conference table, along with video evidence. A senior official flipped through the files, then sighed. "So, Lieutenant Miller not only assaulted his colleagues but was also involved in multiple previous racist incidents." Another nodded, his face solemn. "It is unacceptable. We cannot allow him to continue in the police force." No need for too much controversy. Richard Miller was fired immediately. At the same time, the officers who had colluded with him were also suspended and severely disciplined. A real earthquake just swept through this police station. That same night, the video of the incident spread at a dizzying speed on social networks. Social justice activists took to the streets, demanding drastic reforms. Television news continuously broadcast the event, raising questions about racism in the police force. The whole of America is looking to this city. 2 days later, Vanessa stood in front of City Hall, speaking before hundreds of reporters and residents. Her voice was calm but strong. "I didn't come here to maintain a broken system. I came here to change it." She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd. "Anyone on my police force who is racist, who has a disregard for fellow citizens, that person will be removed." The crowd applauded loudly. Vanessa looked straight into the camera, sending a clear message. "I will not give in, and I will not stop." Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you like this content, please click like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next meaningful stories, because tomorrow we will have another meaningful story for you.